They always looked down on us. It didn't matter how many times we warned them, how many scars we bore, how many cities we rebuilt from ash, or how often we clawed our way out of extinction with nothing but broken bones and rage in our hearts. To the aliens, we were still just primitives, unstable, emotional, dangerous, sure, but controllable, amusing even, like a wild animal behind thick glass, roaring, snarling, but locked safely away. The Galactic Council had rules, protocols, centuries-old treaties that kept the peace between hundreds of species. They didn't like humans because we didn't bow to those rules. We didn't trust treaties. We didn't forget who burned us. And worst of all, we didn't stay in our place. At first, they laughed at us. Earth? A Class 5 death world, they called it. Poisoned skies, unstable weather. Predators with teeth the size of forearms. And then there was us. Humans. Thin-skinned, heat-leaking mammals with short lifespans and a disturbing tendency toward war. According to alien logic, we shouldn't have made it past the Bronze Age. But we did. Again and again. And now we were tired. Not tired in the weak, surrendering way. Tired in the old soldier way. The kind of tired that coils behind the eyes and waits. The kind that holds a blade under the table while smiling politely. That patient, final kind of tired. For years, we tried to play their game, joined the council, wore their stupid robes, spoke in their sterile dialects, let them sneer while pretending to listen. We sent envoys, scientists, peacemakers, but no matter what we gave, they only saw apes in suits, and then they went too far. It started on the outer colonies, places the council didn't care about, little mining outposts and terraforming sites where humans worked like machines under alien contracts. The work was brutal, conditions worse than Earth in its worst days. But we did it. Quietly, efficiently, because we knew no one would come for us. That is, until the Scorexi decided we weren't efficient enough. They started pulling colonists out of airlocks. No trials, no explanation. Just accusations of laziness, disobedience, sabotage, whatever excuse they needed. We lost entire settlements overnight, families, children, and the council? They called it an internal matter, told us to cooperate, to keep the peace. So we did something they didn't expect. We stopped cooperating. No more envoys, no more reports, no more humans begging for a seat at their table. We shut off communications. The colonies went dark. Earth cut off all diplomatic channels. Our ships disappeared from trade lanes. Our ambassadors came home. At first they laughed again. They always did. Humans are too unstable, said the Jaren. They can't survive without our technology, sneered the Virex Collective. Let them sulk. They'll come crawling back. But we weren't sulking. We were preparing. The Deathworlders had remembered who they were, and for the first time in centuries, so had the aliens. The first signs were subtle. A Scorexi dreadnought exploded in dock. Officially, an engineering failure. Then a Jaren diplomat vanished en route to a peace summit, blamed on pirates. A Virex mining facility went silent. Ion storm, they claimed. But we knew, and so did they. Something had changed. Something ancient had woken in the bones of humanity. We weren't asking anymore. We weren't warning. We were waiting. And when the aliens finally realized what they had done, it was already too late. The silence made them nervous. In the great marble halls of the Galactic Council, where the air always smelled too clean and the words were always too polite, nervousness was spreading like rot. The kind that crept in beneath gold-trimmed robes and titanium armor. The kind that didn't make noise but made every species feel it in their bones. Because humans weren't talking anymore, and that scared them more than a declaration of war ever could. See, most species yelled when they were angry, roared, threatened. They postured and sent fleets, held trials, and called press conferences. Anger to them was loud, predictable. But humans? We got quiet. We stopped sending messages. We stopped complaining about trade violations. We stopped asking for help. And most telling of all, we stopped dying. For over a century, humans had always been the bleeding edge, the labor force, the soldiers, the ones foolish enough to settle toxic worlds and bend them into homes. We died in droves so others wouldn't have to. We were useful that way. But after the last massacre on Eden 4, no more deaths were reported. Not from raids, not from accidents, not even from standard colony hazards. At first, the Council assumed censorship. Primitive media suppression, the Jaren ambassador had snorted at a session, her glittering spines twitching in smug rhythm. They're hiding internal unrest. But when Council agents tried to land on human colonies to confirm it, none returned. Their shuttles went dark the moment they crossed orbit. No beacons, no distress calls, just silence. As if the planets themselves swallowed them whole. Even the Yasari, those scavenger freaks who had once chewed through the ruins of entire civilizations, turned their ships away at the sight of human colonies. Quietly, no announcement, no posturing, just rerouted their charts and never came back. That was when the whispers started. Among the Council aides, the navigators, the private merc fleets who'd once boasted about hunting humans like vermin in the asteroid belts. The whispers said Earth was building something. Something big, something ancient, something angry. And worst of all, it was working. Far from the polished planets and synthetic moons of the Council's core, Earth had changed. Not in shape, or climate, or species. No, Earth still looked like it always did. Blue and green, chaotic and wild, spinning defiantly in the dark. But the atmosphere had changed. There was something behind the skies now. Something that watched. It began with the Project Gravespike, a silent initiative hidden deep in the Mariana Trench. No satellites ever survived long enough to map it, not even human ones. But everyone knew it existed. That's where we buried our enemies. That's where we reverse-engineered alien death tech. Where we broke it down. Made it human. Made it worse. And while the Council debated ethics in air-conditioned towers, we were studying war like it was poetry. The old Earth nations had finally stopped bickering too. America, China, Russia, the Eurobloc, the African coalition. They'd all once played tug-of-war with human futures. But when Eden 4 burned and the Council called it justified, something snapped. The last human UN meeting was a single sentence: no more begging. After that, borders didn't matter anymore. The humans didn't just fall off the radar. We became ghosts. Ships stopped using transponders. Fleets were built in dark space, far from mapped sectors. The trade rings reported attacks on their convoys, ships sliced open by weapons no one recognized, their crews found frozen with eyes melted in terror. And still, no proof it was us. We didn't need credit. We wanted fear. The aliens still didn't get it. They thought they could hold another summit. Calm things down. Throw more treaties at the fire and hope it wouldn't spread. They even sent invitations to Earth. Platinum sealed, written in 8 languages, delivered by hand. No reply. So, they tried something desperate. They sent a peacekeeper fleet, 23 ships, 4 species, 2 Dreadnought-class command vessels, all armed, all shielded, all flying the blue and silver flag of the Galactic Council. Their mission: to secure communication and re-establish cooperation with human leadership. None of them even made it past Mars. The feed cut in during a live council broadcast. Right as Ambassador Ralzek of the Skarexi was ranting about human overreaction, the central holoscreen blinked once, then went black. For a moment, everyone thought it was a glitch. until it came back. And they saw her. No robes, no council symbols, no smile. Just a human woman. Mid-40s, pale skin, buzzed hair, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept in years. She wore a black combat jacket with no insignia. Standing against a concrete wall riddled with burn marks. There was no name, no rank, just her voice. Calm, cold, final. "We received your fleet. Thank you for the metal. It will be recycled." The council chamber froze. Ambassador Ralzek started to rise from his seat. The human woman tilted her head. "You talk about peace while stepping on our throats. You speak of laws while tearing our children out of their homes. We asked. We pleaded. We suffered in silence while your kind laughed at our blood." She leaned closer to the camera. "You forgot what it means to fear something. So let me remind you." The screen blinked again. What followed wasn't war. It was demonstration. The Council's outermost research outpost, Orin 9, was located in a nebula so unstable it could fry sensors in minutes. No species but humans had dared build there. The feed showed Orin 9 being obliterated from the inside. No fleet, no missiles, just pressure waves, magnetic distortion. Technology turned against itself. The station's own defense grid folded inward and atomized its core. Shields bent the wrong way, collapsing instead of deflecting. The last image was a crew of Zarin engineers screaming as gravity reversed, pulling their bones through the floor like clay. Then another feed came up. Trade route K-17. A Virex cargo train, kilometers long, warped into dead space, only to find a human dreadnought waiting. No flags, no ID, just silence. It didn't fire. It spoke. "Return to your systems. Earth doesn't trade with slavers." The Virex train complied. They didn't even hesitate. 4,000 tons of cargo abandoned in vacuum, just to get away faster. In less than 3 days, 5 council systems declared neutrality. The council tried to spin it, of course, said it was terrorism, said Earth was a rogue element, a danger to galactic stability. They tried to rally support for a counterstrike. But no one came, because every race had heard stories about what Earth used to be, what it could become. We were the ones who burned ourselves for light, the ones who killed gods in our myths, just to make room for ourselves. We were the only species that built cities in deserts, carved homes into mountains, drank poison and called it medicine, stared into the stars and dared to conquer them. Deathworlders, they called us. But now they understood the part they always ignored. We didn't fear death. We trained with it. On a quiet night, light years from any capital, a lone council scout ship picked up a signal, buried beneath layers of encryption, bouncing through wormhole echoes like it didn't want to be found. The signal contained a phrase in Old Earth English, translated 1,000 ways before it was banned outright. The phrase was short, barely a sentence, but it echoed across the stars like a curse. "Let them come. We're already home." The war never began with a declaration. There was no trumpet, no council address, no dramatic countdown. It began, as most revolutions do, with a whisper, the kind that moves faster than light, passed from one trembling clawed hand to another, across neural networks, through stolen signals, down ancient corridors built in peace and arrogance. The whisper said, "They are not fighting for dominance. They are fighting like they have nothing left to lose." And that was the part that shook even the coldest, oldest races, because everyone thought humans wanted power, that we were climbing the council's ladder to eventually take the top seat. That all the diplomacy, the mining contracts, the language lessons, the crawling and nodding and smiling, was just ambition disguised in manners. But they were wrong. We didn't want power. We didn't want thrones. We wanted revenge. The kind that doesn't end in victory parades or peace treaties. The kind that burns both sides and leaves only one standing by default. That slow, creeping revenge born from being stepped on for too long, not for resources, not for ideology, just because we were weaker, because they could. But we weren't weaker anymore. It started with the cracking of Inaya, a moon orbiting the Virex homeworld. Known for its deep ocean research colonies and strange mineral flows, it held little strategic value. At least, that's what the Council believed. Until it exploded. Not into fragments. No, it imploded, like something inside had folded in on itself. Later, analysis by terrified Virex scientists showed signs of gravitational tampering, using human-engineered singularity mines. The tech wasn't even supposed to exist outside theory. But we didn't ask permission anymore. We made nightmares real. The Virex lost 6 million researchers, engineers, and civilians that day. Their public broadcast was clear. This is disproportionate. You've crossed a line. Earth never responded. And that's what made it worse. Because when someone screams at you and you stay silent, they start to realize maybe they're not dealing with an opponent anymore. Maybe they're dealing with a force. Human fleets stopped moving like fleets. They stopped acting like formations, lines, and command trees. Instead, they spread. Like mold, like rot, infiltrating systems one by one. No central command. No coordination any council species could track. They'd jump into an empty system, orbit a dead world, stay quiet. A week later, that system wouldn't belong to the Council anymore. No weapons fired, no warning, just silence. And then the beacons flipped. And if someone tried to take it back, the system would answer with gravity pulses that tore ships apart from the inside, or hacking viruses that made AI eat themselves, or soundless missiles that pierced quantum shields like wet paper. We weren't just fighting smart. We were fighting cruel. And that cruelty, so alien to the civilized galactic species, was why they began to fear us on a different level. Because most species evolve with the goal of avoiding suffering. But humans? We adapted by surviving it. We didn't fear pain. We wore it like armor. In the Outer Rim, a small moon named Dreshtar was famous for its biological libraries, millions of DNA samples from across the galaxy, harvested, stored, and catalogued by the Feliari Consortium. It was considered sacred ground. A neutral site. Even during the Core Wars, not a single shot had ever been fired on Dreshtar. Until now. When the Feliari refused to share their genetic databases with Earth's new research collective, 3 cloaked vessels entered the system under falsified coordinates. Within hours, every living thing on the moon had gone silent. A week later, a transmission was broadcast. Not from Earth, not even from human government, just a voice. You believed knowledge was yours to hoard. You believed pain was ours to bear. You were wrong on both counts. The next morning, every Feliari ship AI began speaking in English. Meanwhile, back on Earth, things were changing in ways no outsider could see. The planet had become quiet. Not empty, but focused. Efficient. Streets still bustled, children still played. But there was a heaviness in the air. Like everyone, everywhere, was waiting for something. Humans had always been loud, chaotic, expressive. But now they whispered. Whispers in subways, whispers on comms, whispers through encoded star maps and neural links. A new phrase passed between lips like a prayer. Eyes up, teeth bared. We're the last monsters they'll ever meet. The phrase wasn't a command. It wasn't an order from leadership. It was a truth, a belief. We weren't looking for peace anymore. Peace was a lie told by those with power to those they feared would take it. No. Now we wanted something older than peace. Balance. The Scarexi, still arrogantly sure of their military supremacy, sent a planetary battalion to reclaim the mining planet of Gorsh 3 from human occupation. The battalion never made landfall, because Gorsh 3 didn't exist anymore. Human terraformers had converted the rocky world into a decoy shell, an elaborate ruse of projected mass and gravity. The real planet had been hollowed out and turned into a mobile space weapon, coasting silently through space on ion drives no other species could track. It fired once. The Skorexi dreadnought, Ulzavar, blinked out of existence, not destroyed, just erased, as if it had never been built. No wreckage, no heat signature, only silence. Human ships never celebrated, never broadcast victories. They just moved on. Within the council chambers, cracks began to show. Species once proud and unified turned on each other. The Jeren accused the Virex of hiding human collaborators. The Felyari broke their non-aggression pact with the Colon after discovering stolen Earth tech on black markets. And Earth just watched as panic replaced policy, watched as blame replaced order. Human intelligence operatives, once low-tier diplomats and exploited traitors, suddenly appeared at the centers of power in every council species. Not in shadows, not in backrooms. At the table, openly, unapologetically. One of them, a soft-voiced, gray-haired man named Elias Marek, addressed the council himself. He didn't threaten, didn't rage, didn't even raise his voice. He simply said, "You were never afraid of humans. You were afraid of what would happen if we ever stopped being afraid of you." And then he walked out. Just like that. At this point, the council did what all broken empires do. They tried to sue for peace. They offered concessions, apologies, war reparations. They even offered Earth full control of several star systems and a permanent council seat. Earth sent back a single message. "Keep your stars. We have our own." And with that, the council collapsed. Not officially, not with parades or declarations. It just stopped functioning. Meetings went unattended, votes failed to pass, fleets refused orders. Because the old system had been built on fear, on the illusion that some species mattered more than others. And now that illusion had been shattered, by humans, by Deathworlders, by the species they'd mocked, enslaved, bombed, sterilized, ignored, and no matter how hard they tried to glue the broken pieces back together, every alien knew it in their gut. The age of galactic order was over. The age of Earth had begun. But Earth didn't want to rule. We weren't building an empire. We were erasing them. Across the stars, colonies stopped referring to human territory. They simply called it the wastes, the space humans claimed and left hollow. Because when we took a system, we didn't build monuments. We just left nothing. No cultures, no signs, just burned outposts, gutted ships, and warning beacons that repeated the same phrase: "Do not follow us. Do not try to find us. Let this part of the galaxy rest." The scariest part? We meant it. In the old days, the word human meant nothing to most species. It was just another entry in the Council archives. Species 5817, Class Voith Deathworld Origin, bipeds, oxygen breathers, primitive social structures, curious to a fault, stubborn, violent, adaptable, borderline irrational, annoying perhaps, dangerous, sure, but never significant. That changed. Now, when a transmission mentioned humans, channels went quiet, rooms cleared, even pirates stopped to listen. It was a signal of something larger than war. It meant someone had pushed too far, that something had cracked open in the dark, and that whatever came next wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning. In a small corner of the galaxy, on the Council-subsidized planet Carthal 8, a university once prided itself as the pinnacle of galactic anthropology. They used to teach humans as a cautionary tale. Lectures would begin with photos of Earth's old wars, footage of nuclear bombings, deforestation, mass extinction events, all narrated with a quiet arrogance. Observe the primitive, learn from their chaos. But now? Now the lecture halls were empty. Professors resigned. Libraries locked their doors. Students quietly left in the night, transferring to science programs, trade careers, anything that didn't require understanding the minds of Deathworlders. The entire anthropology department was shut down after a graduate student named Kel Yathi, a young Lirsani scholar, lost her mind. She'd been studying human philosophy, deep diving into archived Earth data, trying to make sense of why humans had become this. And one night, she simply walked out of the university, stood in the middle of a traffic bridge, and started screaming. "They don't want to win, don't you see? They want to end the game. They want silence." She clawed her own skin off before they sedated her. Last thing she wrote, found etched into her dorm wall in her own blood, was a line from an old human poem. "We are the quiet between storms, the last breath before the scream." They erased it from the records, of course, called it an isolated breakdown. But the whispers never stopped. And across the galaxy, more alien minds began to crack. On the ruined world of Jova 5, a once prosperous Virex colony now reduced to ash and echo, a scavenger crew found something strange buried beneath a collapsed comms tower. A box. No heat signature, no obvious locks. It was perfectly square. Too perfect. Unnatural. Every attempt to scan it failed. One of the crew, a hardened old merc named Tolak Vrin, finally touched it with his bare hand. The box opened. Inside, there was nothing. Just darkness. Not shadow, not emptiness. Darkness. The kind that pulls at your thoughts, not your vision. The kind that has mass. Tolak fell to his knees and began to weep. He never explained why, just said, "They don't fear the dark because they live in it. They are the dark now." He quit the crew the next day, took a long-range transport, and was never heard from again. The rest of the crew left the box behind. Said it hummed when no one was looking. Back on Earth, things were becoming even stranger. There was no more government, not really. No presidents, no monarchs, no prime ministers. Instead, something new had emerged. The directive. Not a ruling body, not an empire. It had no faces, no symbols, just a purpose. To ensure no one would ever harm humanity again. It operated in silence, using networks of trusted operatives, old war AI, exiled scientists, and soldiers who had stopped dreaming long ago. If the directive sent you a message, you didn't reply. You acted. The directive wasn't a dictatorship. It didn't command. It simply reminded humans why they bled, why they burned, why they had clawed up from a dying Earth, watched the stars laugh at them, and still pushed forward with cracked hands and bloodied teeth. And everyone on Earth understood that message, even the children. In the vast frozen expanse of Colony 27C, known unofficially as Icegrave, a group of alien refugees lived under human protection. Not many knew about it. Earth had never advertised its kindness. It didn't need to. The aliens there weren't enemies. They were survivors, those who had defected from the Council before the collapse, who had seen the writing on the wall and chosen to kneel before the storm rather than stand against it. They lived in quiet peace. Until one day, a Scarexi raiding vessel, rogue and desperate, found the coordinates. They thought they'd found a weak point in the human machine. They landed, walked right into the main settlement. They never walked out, because Icegrave wasn't defended by armies. It didn't need to be. The children handled it. They didn't use guns or bombs. They used sound. Pressure. They shut down the Scarexi nervous systems in real time, hacking their cybernetics through stolen implants, reprogramming fear into agony. The screams lasted 6 minutes. Then silence. When Earth received the distress call from the refugees, they responded the same way they always did now. We already know. Even species untouched by the war started to change. The Solari, a race of peaceful scholars who had never engaged in violence, quietly abandoned their trade routes and began retreating to their homeworld. The Cullen began rewriting their cultural textbooks, removing all references to human inferiority. And the Virex? They started building walls around their own cities, not against other species, against fear. There was no word for it, no diplomatic term, but every species felt it. The humans had gone somewhere else, mentally, spiritually, evolutionarily. We had stepped off the path and found something in the dark that changed us. They used to call us animals, savages, chaos incarnate. But now they understood. We weren't animals. We were the storm they saw in their own nightmares, given flesh. And we had decided to stop running from them. A message was intercepted by a rogue council remnant attempting to regroup near the collapsed border of Sector G9. It was short. Just a single line, bouncing off decommissioned satellites and hacked relay stations. No source, no signature. We were patient, we were kind, now we are correct. The remnant never responded. They self-terminated, not because of weapons, not because of human ships approaching, but because they'd realized something terrifying. They deserved it. At the edge of the known galaxy, an ancient gate, one of the first wormhole arches ever built, still floated in the void, unused and silent. Until one day the sensors activated. A signal was coming through. Council engineers panicked. The wormhole hadn't been functional in decades. It wasn't even aligned with any active system, but the signal kept growing. At first, they assumed it was an attack, but it wasn't. It was a recording. A simple, grainy Earth broadcast from centuries ago. A woman speaking to a human camera, smiling, holding a child. We always wanted to be part of something bigger. We looked up and hoped. Even when they hated us, we kept trying. But hope can break too, and now we're not hoping anymore. The gate collapsed 7 minutes later. The shockwave wiped out 3 satellites and shattered the nearest relay post. But the message remained, played on loop. Across the stars. And the aliens? They finally understood the horror. It wasn't that humans were winning. It was that humans were no longer fighting to win. They were fighting to end the story, to close the book, to take everything the galaxy had ever done to them and grind it into a lesson etched in blood. A warning for whatever species came next. The old galaxy was quiet now. Not peaceful. Just quiet. A silence thick with tension. Not a breath-held sort of silence, but the one that comes after screaming. After the fight. After blood paints the walls and only one heartbeat remains. That's what the galaxy had become. No one talked about victory anymore. Not in the old way. Not like conquest. Not like glory. Because there was no one to win against anymore. The council was finished. Its flags were tattered. Its systems abandoned. The mighty Scarexi fleets that once terrorized Earth's colonies now sat dead in orbit, rusting above uninhabited worlds. Even the pirate factions, who once feasted off human desperation, were scattering like rats into black holes. But the worst part wasn't the destruction. It was what humans didn't do. They didn't claim territory, didn't build empires, didn't declare a new council of their own. No human federation, no statues, no symbols. They just moved on, like shadows, like death. The Jaren homeworld was the last true stronghold left. Massive orbital defenses, 4-tiered shield domes, and a sun-powered arsenal that could obliterate moons with a single pulse. No species had ever breached it, not in 10,000 years of galactic history. When Earth came, they didn't bring an armada. they sent a seed. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a weapon, at least not in any traditional sense. It looked like a sphere of glass, no bigger than a melon, carried on a quiet, self-propelled probe that slipped through the Jaren's orbital defenses like it had been invited. It landed softly in the gardens of the High Assembly. The Jaren laughed, thought it was a bluff. They placed the seed in containment, scanned it for explosives, traced its energy signature. Nothing. Just a hollow glass orb. Inside, a single leaf floating in amber-colored fluid. Human DNA, ancient, pre-war, untouched by biotech, and a note etched on the inner surface in a language so old none of their current scholars even spoke it anymore. A dead tongue. Earth Latin. Fiat exitium, et pax in umbris. Let there be ruin and peace in the shadows. They didn't understand it until it was too late. Because the seed wasn't designed to destroy, it was designed to remind. The next morning, the Jaren woke up to silence. No comms, no data, no AI. Every network had collapsed into static. Every system went dark. Not offline, erased. The seed had released no virus, no pulse, no EMP. It had simply broadcast a memory. A collective recording of every human colony ever attacked by the Jaren. Every scream, every body, every voice begging for mercy. Millions of echoes pouring into the minds of every Jaren citizen simultaneously. Some went mad. Some fell to their knees in sorrow. Others simply stopped moving. Entire families frozen in horror. The High Assembly burned their own archives, as if deleting their past could undo what they'd seen. But it was too late. The humans didn't need to fire a shot. They turned guilt into a weapon. Shame into ruin. Meanwhile, far from the old war fronts, in the rim void, something older stirred, out past the mapped stars, past the known wormholes, in the deadlight of uncharted systems, where even ancient satellites had stopped beeping centuries ago, humanity had gone digging. Not for conquest, for understanding. And what they found changed everything. At the edge of a neutron graveyard, a cluster of stars collapsed into near-invisible pulses. Human deep scanners picked up patterns. Not radio signals, not language. Something beneath language, emotions, felt across space, carried like heat from an invisible fire. And they weren't alien. They were familiar. Grief, rage, loneliness. Human scientists called it the echo. No other species could perceive it, not even the most advanced neural organisms. But for some reason, humans could. The human brain, damaged by war, trauma, centuries of psychic fragmentation, could resonate with it. They said the echo was a memory of a civilization far older than anything the Council had ever known, a race that destroyed itself long before Earth's first fire was lit. A species so advanced it forgot what it meant to feel, until it died from the inside. And in that death, it left its emotions behind, waiting, feeding, and humans had become the first species to hear its cry. Something changed in us after that. Our soldiers didn't speak much anymore. Our ships didn't hum with energy. They just waited in silence, like wolves in the dark. And our eyes started to look like we'd seen the other side. Because we had. We'd heard the weeping of dead gods. And we whispered back. The other species tried to ignore it. Pretend humanity's evolution into something else was just another phase, a temporary madness. They said we'd settle, eventually. Rebuild, rejoin the galactic order. But the truth settled in quietly. There was no more order. Only Earth. And what Earth had become. The species that once bled in the mud now walked above it, unfeeling, unshaken, untouchable. No one could reach us anymore. Not through diplomacy, not through culture, not through war, because while the rest of the galaxy had grown outward, building cities and colonies. We had grown inward. We became something cold, not evil, not monstrous, just inevitable. In a quiet corner of space, a small council-aligned planet named Tessarion sent a message. It was simple, humble, an attempt at peace. We never harmed you. We have no weapons. We simply wish to trade. Please, don't erase us. A single human drone arrived 3 days later. It dropped a package in the center of their capital. The box opened. Inside was a small stone, rough, jagged, and a single line of text carved by hand. You didn't help us either. Tessarion was left untouched. But no one spoke in the streets after that. No music played, no celebrations. They simply waited, wondering if the silence was a gift or a countdown. On Earth, they say people stopped aging the same. Not biologically, time still passed, skin still wrinkled, bones still weakened. But something had changed in the eyes. Children born in the last cycle never cried. Veterans of the war no longer spoke of it. People stopped writing music with words. Only instruments now, mostly strings, low, deep tones that echoed like mourning wails in space. It wasn't depression, it was focus, clarity. Humanity had shed its skin. The species that once begged for inclusion had become something the stars themselves hesitated to orbit. An old Virex historian once asked, during the last broadcast before their homeworld collapsed into civil unrest, "What do they want now? If not peace, not war, what do the humans actually want?" No one answered. Because there was no answer anymore, not one that mattered. We didn't want thrones. We didn't want revenge anymore. We wanted something no one else could give us. Silence. And when we finally had it, we didn't return to the stars. We just watched. There were still a few species who believed in hope. The Solari were one of them. A peaceful, crystalline-bodied race from the mist-covered planet Theron. The Solari had avoided war longer than any species in galactic history. They believed in harmony, in the balance of life. They meditated with moons and sang to plants. And when the war between humans and the Council broke out, they stayed silent, neutral, and untouched. Until now. Because something changed in the way their forests grew. The trees stopped responding to sunlight. The mist became thick, heavy, not just water vapor, but memory. Grief held in the air like perfume. Solari children began having dreams. They drew images in the soil. Of a woman with no face, standing under a broken sky. Behind her was Earth. Not the real Earth, but something larger, something symbolic. A living planet with black oceans, burning skies, and a voice that sounded like wind dragging bones across steel. The elders called it a vision. The young called it a warning. They all said the same thing. The Earth is watching. One Solari researcher, Talthian, decided to do what no one had dared since the silence began. Send a message to Earth. Not for trade, not for mercy, for understanding. The message was simple. What have you become? It was transmitted on an ancient frequency, one the Council hadn't used in over a century, the kind of signal that had to be intentionally forgotten to even find again. For 3 days, there was no reply, and then, in the middle of the Solari night, every plant on the planet bloomed simultaneously. It wasn't spring, it wasn't seasonal. Every flower, every vine, every moss strand, all of them opened at once. Inside each bloom was a human tooth, clean, white, not decayed, just there. Millions of teeth. No blood, no bones. Just the final smile of a species that no longer cared to explain itself. Talthian died in his sleep that night, his body untouched, his face peaceful, but on the wall of his quarters, written in sap, were his last words. They didn't answer with words. They showed us. The horror of what humanity had become wasn't in what they did. It was in what they stopped doing. They no longer explained themselves, no longer negotiated, no longer performed diplomacy or vengeance or even pride. They had left those things behind, like an old skin. And what remained was a species so emotionally hollowed out that they felt no need to be understood. No guilt, no rage, no justice, just purpose. On the fractured world of Corsin, a last remnant of the Council's military intelligence had huddled in bunkers beneath the crust. Generals, analysts, data scramblers, the ones who still believed there was a way to fix this. They had compiled everything they could find on Earth: human history, human weaponry, human emotion, ancient human religions. They broke into old EarthNet files, watched centuries of footage, analyzed thousands of hours of pre-collapse music, poetry, films, interviews, sermons. They even created a new AI model, Mirage, designed specifically to simulate the human psyche. It took 40 years of stolen tech, 3 black hole processors, and the nervous systems of 9 psychic-enhanced beings to run it. They asked Mirage one question. If they are not seeking dominance or vengeance, what is humanity's final goal? The answer came 12 seconds later, and it broke them. All of them. Some went catatonic. Some tore out their implants. Others simply wandered into the poisonous winds above and let themselves dissolve. Mirage's answer was stored in a black box and buried under 6 miles of rock, but humans already knew what it said. Because we built Mirage, decades ago, before the war even began. We left it behind like a seed, knowing someone would try to understand us too late. And what did Mirage say? What final horror did it predict? It said, humanity is no longer trying to survive the galaxy. It is trying to teach it silence, because silence was all they were ever given. Back on Earth, the skies looked different. Not in a literal sense. The stars were still there, the clouds still drifted, the sun still rose, but you could feel it. The gravity of the planet had deepened, not physically, but emotionally. Ships entering orbit reported feelings of weight, dread, memory. Some pilots cried without knowing why. Others heard voices whispering their own names in static. Earth had become a memory palace, a graveyard of emotion. Not abandoned, not haunted, but patient. It was no longer just a home world. It was a warning post, echoing across the stars. Some say the change started during the scorch years, when half of Earth's surface burned under Council-backed orbital strikes, when children were raised in underground cities with no light, when entire generations grew up reading about peace like it was fiction. Others say the transformation began long before that, with our first wars, with our first betrayals, with our first realization that kindness would never be enough to earn safety. But the truth is simpler. Humanity changed when it stopped waiting to be accepted. We'd begged, bled, bent. And when the galaxy laughed at our pain, we stood up and said, "Then you'll learn another way." Now, across 1,000 systems, humanity is no longer a name. It's a myth. Children of other species whisper it at night to keep each other from misbehaving. Don't go past the mines. Earthwalkers live out there. If you tell lies, the humans will come and steal your voice. Stay quiet in the dark, or the Deathworlders will hear your breathing. But it's not fear in their voices anymore. It's something worse. It's awe. Because deep down, they know the truth. The humans were right. The galaxy was cruel, and now something worse than cruelty was walking among them. Balance. On a barren moon in a forgotten system, an alien child once asked their caretaker, "What does Earth look like?" The caretaker, an old translator from the Council days, paused, thought of the jungles, the oceans, the way fire looked in the snow, the sound of thunder on black mountains, the smile of a human before they pulled the trigger. He finally said, "It looks like a story we're not allowed to forget." And above them, in that same night sky, a single black ship passed overhead. No lights, no engines, no trace, just the shape of a ghost remembering it used to be human. The stars used to feel infinite. Back when the Council reigned, the galaxy was carved into sectors, lanes, dominions, maps were drawn and redrawn, boundaries constantly shifted with treaties, annexations, and wars no one remembered how to end. But not anymore. Now there were no maps, not because territory was gone, but because no one dared to claim anything. The places Earth touched had become voids, not in matter, not in energy. In meaning, they were systems still rich with life, planets still spinning, suns still burning. But no one lived there. No one tried to colonize, to trade, to study, because the moment you stepped inside those borders, something changed. Time slowed. Air felt heavier. Old songs you'd never heard hummed in your bones. Machinery glitched. Thoughts grew distant. Some said they even dreamed human memories that weren't theirs. The galaxy began to call them the quiet zones, not forbidden, not claimed, just known. Known as places where humanity had decided to stop speaking. And in their silence, they told the truth better than words ever could. A generation passed. Alien children grew up in a galaxy without war, without politics, without conquest, but also without wonder, because fear had replaced it. And humanity, once mocked for its ambition, now served as a cosmic boundary, a cultural event horizon, anything beyond which could no longer be explained. On the ex-council world of Velion, a new religion was born. Not a typical one, not with gods or heavens. It was called the Echo Path. Its core belief was that humanity had transcended into something beyond biology or culture, something eternal. A species that had once been flesh and bone, but now existed as a response. A correction to galactic arrogance, a natural law given form. Their symbol was a broken chain inside a black sun. Their scripture was a single human phrase carved onto every altar. We waited. Now they wait. The Echo Path never worshipped humans. They feared them, yes, but mostly, they studied them. They tried to understand what made a species break so cleanly from everything it was, and still stand taller than ever before. Meanwhile, on Earth, the air itself had changed. Visitors, rare and few, often described a sensation the moment they touched soil. It was like gravity remembered you, like the planet itself knew your name, even if you'd never been there. The sky didn't just feel vast. It felt aware. Ships still docked in orbit, mostly for observation. But none lingered. No alien stayed longer than a day. The pressure in their minds grew unbearable, as if Earth whispered things not in sound, but in understanding. They said Earth had become sentient. But not like AI, not like neural webs. It had become emotionally sentient. It didn't think, it didn't speak, it felt. And when you stood on its surface, you felt its pain. An aging Jaren veteran named Krektal, one of the few survivors of the Eden 4 massacre, returned to Earth under special conditions. His record showed he once spared a human child during the purge. That child, grown now, was part of the directive. He invited Krektal back. No guards, no terms, just a message. Come, it's time you saw what we built. Krektal, brittle and trembling, stepped onto Earth expecting vengeance, but all he found was a small room, a fire, and a photo album. Inside were images of families, laughing, farming, holding hands in bunkers, sketches drawn in dirt, music composed on scavenged instruments, and at the end of the album, A single image. The very child he had spared. Smiling, holding a rifle, standing in front of a line of council ships reduced to scrap. Underneath, in human script, it said, "I learned mercy from you. The rest I learned from silence." Krektal wept for the first time in his life, and Earth said nothing. The Felyari, once masters of trade and diplomacy, now lived in floating cities over acid seas. They no longer sent envoys. They no longer debated. They simply waited. Waited for the next sign that humanity had moved. They weren't alone. Entire species had become static. Not extinct, just suspended. They built no new ships, planted no new colonies, explored no new systems, because they feared finding a place already touched by Earth. Or worse, finding one that hadn't been yet. What remained of the once mighty Virex finally sent an emissary. Her name was Tessalin Kor, a biosculpted diplomat bred specifically to withstand human psychological effects. She'd been trained with Earth data. Old Earth languages, even old Earth emotions. She could mimic grief, anger, resolve. They called her the Bridge. She landed on Earth and was greeted by no army, no ambassador, just a child, human, silent, holding a stone. She walked with him for 3 kilometers into a ruined museum. Inside were statues, not of leaders, not of warriors, but of failures. A man holding a treaty torn in half, a woman covering her ears while a council bombardment burns the sky, a child digging through rubble for a limb. At the end of the hallway, Tessalin found a mirror. No frame, no glass. Just a pool of water on the floor, perfectly still. As she looked in, she didn't see her face. She saw Earth, not as it was, but as it had become. Dark, still. Listening. And then a voice. Not from the child. Not from any speaker. From inside her own mind. "Do you understand now?" She collapsed. When she awoke, she didn't remember her training, her programming, her mission, only the face of the child with the stone. The directive recorded the event, and archived it under a file name used only twice in all of human data storage. Last contact. The galaxy stopped trying to reach Earth after that, not because it feared retaliation, but because it finally realized humanity had moved on. They weren't staying silent to be cruel. They were silent because they had no more use for words. Because Earth had done something no other species could. It had won. Not just the war, but the narrative. The story of humanity had stopped being written by others. Now, we wrote it ourselves. And the rest of the galaxy? They became our footnotes. No one saw the end happen. There was no last battle. No final speech, no dramatic fade to black. There were only changes, slow and creeping, like ice growing over the bones of an ancient corpse. One by one, the stars stopped blinking. Not literally, not burned out, but lost to the narrative. Forgotten by the species who once mapped them, feared by the ones who stayed away, revered by the few who still remembered what they had been. Before Earth passed through. Entire sectors of space simply became unspoken, not forbidden, just avoided, revered. As if naming them might summon something back. It was as though the galaxy itself, with all its pride and intellect and thousands of years of cultural evolution, had been reset to silence. A different kind of silence. Not the terrifying one, not the violent one, but a silence that watched, a silence that judged. And above all, a silence that had won. Humanity didn't vanish. It didn't ascend or transcend or go extinct. It settled, spread like black ink through cold water, not aggressively, not in conquest, but permanently. You could feel it in places no longer mapped. on abandoned moons where music played with no source, on derelict stations with no gravity, where children once played games in low orbit until the war took their parents, in the old battlefields where wreckage floated for centuries, untouched, because no one dared disturb the memory still lingering in metal and blood. These places weren't haunted by ghosts. They were haunted by understanding. The understanding that a line had been crossed, not by humanity, but by everyone else. It took centuries before the last alien race even dared to use Earth's name again. They didn't call it Earth, though. They called it Origin, not because it was where humans came from, but because it was where everything changed, where the galaxy cracked in half between what it was before Earth rose and what it became after humanity stopped asking for permission. There are stories now, told in whispers across flickering campfires on backwater moons, traded between smugglers and drifters who don't care for politics. Some say they're myths, others say they're warnings, but they all begin the same way. There was once a world so cruel it taught its people that pain was normal, and they all end the same way. So those people taught the galaxy what pain really was. Some say Earth can still be reached. That if you fly far enough through the uncharted veil, where nav beacons blink irregularly and engines hum with hesitation, you'll find a black planet surrounded by lightless satellites, watched over by a single station with no doors, no windows, no visible power source. It doesn't hail you. It doesn't fire. It just waits. And if you approach it, your ship will start to dream, not hallucinate, not malfunction. Dream. Images you never lived. Memories you never had. Bombs dropping onto cities. Fires spreading across oceans. Laughter in bunkers. Hope dying in slow, careful silence. And then, always, at the end, a single phrase burned into your thoughts like a scar. You laughed at us. Now we are your silence. Those who return never speak again, not because they're broken, but because they finally understand. And Earth? It never spoke again. Not through radio, not through diplomacy, not through action, because it didn't need to. It had already written its legacy, not in flags, not in conquest, not in language, but in consequence. Centuries passed. Civilizations rose, others collapsed. New alliances formed. New empires flirted with war, but they never crossed into the quiet zones, never touched the graveyards of council worlds, never set foot on the ashes of Eden 4, never tampered with human tech, and most importantly, never disturbed the silence. There's a place far beyond the reach of modern scanners where space ripples wrong. A singularity that shouldn't exist, bending gravity in a way that even physics refuses to measure. It's not a wormhole, not a black hole, it's a boundary. And carved into the remains of a once golden satellite, spinning slowly above that rift, are words etched in over 100 languages. They're old, weathered, scarred, but readable. They say, "Here ends the old galaxy. Beyond this point lies consequence. You may enter, but you will not return the same." Most ships turn back, but some don't. Some enter, desperate, curious, broken, and sometimes a message slips out through the distortion field. A voice, always different, sometimes human, sometimes not, but always saying the same thing. "We don't want your surrender. We just want you to understand what we became." The galaxy eventually came to terms with it. That humans weren't monsters, weren't devils, weren't heroes either. They were something older, something earned. The final response of a world that had been stabbed too many times, and instead of bleeding out, taught the blade to fear. And in that understanding came peace, not harmony, not trust, but a new peace, one built on mutual silence, the silence of ships that pass in the night but never hail each other, The silence of stars left unclaimed because their soil remembers. The silence of a galaxy that finally learned. Never laugh at a species that survives hell. They might rebuild it and show you what you taught them. And if anyone ever asks, where did the humans go? The answer is simple. They never left. You just stopped seeing them because they stopped needing you to.